Roguelikes are booming these days, and fans of the genre are eating good, as this once niche genre is rapidly rising into mainstream appeal. But of the legions of solid and quality titles in the genre, one stands notably taller than the rest. Any fan of roguelikes, hell, any fan of gaming period, owes it to themselves to give this game a try. Because without a shadow of a doubt, by any metric in the world, Risk of Rain 2 is an S-tier game. Now I bet you're sitting there on the John watching this and asking yourself, what is Risk of Rain and why is it great? That's a simple question with a lot of answers. Risk of Rain is a third-person action roguelike extraction class/character shooter, optionally multiplayer game, and yes, while many of these individual elements of the game are phenomenal, it really is the synergy of these various parts and pieces that make Risk of Rain a triumph of a game with a compelling, one-of-a-kind experience. Before we dive into the real meat and potatoes of this video, let's have a little understanding, okay? I'm just gonna say Risk of Rain and drop the 2. Now, no disrespect to the OG Risk of Rain. You don't have to spend much time in that game to see the bones of what Risk of Rain 2 would become. And since most of us just say Risk of Rain, even though we're talking about 2, we're rolling with that for ease of conversation. Cool? Cool. I've got about 60 hours invested in Risk of Rain, which is chump change for some of you, I know. But although I don't have hundreds of hours of playtime, I still love this game, and I recognize it for the special place it holds in the pantheon of the most revered roguelike titles. But why? Why is Risk of Rain 2 special, and what makes it an S-tier game? First, let's start from the top and break down what Risk of Rain even is. Risk of Rain puts players in the role of one of several selectable survivors from the spacefaring UES Safe Travels on a strange alien world, Petrichor 5, in search of the missing and possibly dead crew of the UES Contact Light, which came from another doomed expedition to this planet from the original Risk of Rain. As the survivors, we explore the planet, fighting off waves of enemies, reaching the teleporter hidden somewhere on our current stage to begin a countdown for our extraction, before moving to the next level and eventually looking for a way to escape the perils of Petrichor 5. Along the way, we level up, unlock various randomized items, power-ups, equipment, and other modifiers in order to make our character stronger to aid in our survival. Well, that, but also to destroy legions of hostile life forms, uncover bits of secrets, lore, alternative levels, unlockable power-ups for future runs, and quite possibly break the game a few times. Risk of Rain's stages or environments are not entirely randomized in nature. Rather, each environment has several variations on its layout. Passing each stage will randomly send you to one of 3 possible environments, and which version of those stages you will explore is randomized. Well, except for stages 5 and 6. These 2 are special. Additionally, there are several secret discoverable areas in Risk of Rain that can be accessed through specific tasks and alternate means, such as the strange nebulous void of the Bulwark Armory to complete challenges to unlock artifacts, or the mythical home of the Newts, the Bazaar Between Time, to access lunar items and other powerful equipment, for the right price. While the relatively defined stage layouts keep Risk of Rain's runs from being as extensively varied as, say, The Binding of Isaac or Enter the Gungeon, whose stages change completely with each run, Risk of Rain does keep enough variance with its shuffling levels to keep players guessing at where they will arrive next. What the game loses in randomization, it makes up for in recognition and a familiarity that allows for players to develop map knowledge over time, which leads to a more efficient looting and navigation process, feeding the overall gameplay loop. The most basic elements of Risk of Rain's gameplay loop goes something like this. Spawn in an environment, kill all the hostile creatures, they're all hostile, so, you know, go nuts. Earn experience and gold, buy items and upgrades with your gold, and get fucking yoked. Once you've thoroughly pissed off the locals and decked yourself in some sick drip, find the teleporter, kill the leader of the local gang, and extract to the next level. This drastically oversimplified description of this roguelike's gameplay loop is technically true, but it's the parts and pieces. The small, interlocking cogs of gameplay elements that form Risk of Rain's masterfully crafted design and solidifies its place as an absolute S-tier game. Take for example the game's approach to difficulty. Players may select an initial difficulty of easy, medium, or hard, with an alternate game mode called Eclipse, which adds stacking gameplay modifiers and debuffs after each successful run, allowing for an even more difficult challenge than Monsoon. I'm a Drizzle or Rainstorm player because I've touched Lady Bits. And everyone knows that if you touch Lady Bits, you become bad at games. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, fellas. How to make the rules. Putting my, as the kids say, Riz game aside, these difficulty options are just the initial difficulty. See, Risk of Rain has a second difficulty mechanic that scales with time, meaning the longer your runs last, the harder and higher the difficulty climbs. This scaling difficulty comes with the classic addition of increasing enemy health and damage, as well as increasing the frequency and number of enemies spawned, including elite versions of enemies, and even certain bosses at random intervals to make the game even more punishing. Difficulty also scales as you progress through each stage, and every time you loop a run, the difficulty bumps up even further. Risk of Rain scaling difficulty is brilliant in the way that it imposes a sense of urgency, using the threat of difficulty scaling to push its players into faster and more streamlined runs to keep the endless tide of spawning mobs from growing ever denser. This is why I play on baby mode, because I'm an arthritis-ridden turtle man with hoarding tendencies, and I never met an environment that I wouldn't pick clean for every single chest and unlockable. I've seen some debate online over whether you should blaze through the game as fast as possible to avoid the difficulty scaling, or if the bump in difficulty is negligible compared to how much stronger you become by taking your time and acquiring as many items as possible. And while the admittedly limited evidence I've seen seems to lean toward the latter, I'm not going to claim any real authority on what method is more efficient or effective. Maybe this comes down to playstyle in the end. If you're a player that has to go fast and you quite frankly suck at exploration and being thorough about looting every chest and unlockable in an environment, then you'll probably do better just making a beeline to the teleporter. On the other hand, if you are a slow boomer that likes to check every nook and cranny of a map for secrets and loot like yours truly, then trying to go fast is likely to just end in disaster anyway, so embrace your inner loot goblin and scrounge up every bit of resource a stage has to offer before moving on. Whether you teleport, rush, or take your time, either way the difficulty scaling will be fed by Risk of Rain's often overlooked system of enemy spawning and placement. Monsters spawn in waves and proximate to your location rather than spread out across the map, and because enemies in Risk of Rain are the primary source of gold needed for unlocking items and upgrades, this consistent proximity spawn is essential for the game's flow, not only to continue accruing gold for new power-ups, but, more importantly, taking down waves of hostile mobs are the primary source of the game's fun. Enemies spawning proximal to the player at all times minimizes the empty playtime wandering around the map to find resources that is so common in other games, and instead meaningfully engages the player with a constant stream of Risk of Rain's primary gameplay loop. But engagements can't come solely from decimating the population of an alien world, so let's talk about one of Risk of Rain's other prominent features, the Traversal. The movement and traversal systems of Risk of Rain has a variety of options, and depending on which survivor you're playing as, their movement kit changes dramatically. That includes everything from rolls, slides, massive leaps, teleportation, cloaked speedy boy runs, hovering flight, and more. Add in a little sprinkling of items that buff your movement speed a little, or, a lot. And getting around in each environment to hunt down chests and items has that satisfying feeling only found in games that really prioritize the feel and experience of butter smooth movement and navigation. While this aspect of the game isn't as engaging as the combat and shooting included in this looting simulator, the importance of movement and stage traversal is one of the most understated aspects of game design, and one that can really make or break an experience. Risk of Rain, thankfully, is a joy to get around in, making navigation and the hunt for items or the teleporter fluid and such a satisfying experience between each hectic enemy engagement. And of course, with that smooth exploration, we navigate our way to arguably the most important part of each stage, the teleporter. This goal right here, find and activate the teleporter. That's the one and only goal for like 97% of the game. Each stage has a randomly placed teleporter that allows you to proceed to the next level after an extraction period. Activating the teleporter starts a countdown, during which you have to stay within a designated zone around the teleporter in order to fully charge it and allow your survivors to extract to the next environment. Activating the teleporter calls in one of several possible bosses that will do their best to stomp you flat, along with an endlessly spawning legion of baddies, ranging from the most basic little bitch-made fodder guys to the big bad elites, which may be almost as dangerous as the boss itself. A normal run in Risk of Rain, whatever the fuck that is, ends at stage 6, where you kill God and board an escape shuttle on the moon to whisk away to safety and or an even more horrible death. Who knows? But on stage 5, you can choose to recalibrate the teleporter, and instead of going to the moon to kill Wish.com Thor, you can start back on one of the stage 1 environments, progressing back through all of the stages with your items and upgrades, and all the pumped up difficulty scaling from your first run through the stages, plus a little extra heat, a little extra fire sprinkled on top. This loop can be repeated as many times as the player can survive, and lead to an ever-increasing scaling of power in both the player and the enemy. This scaling can become absolutely insane in both directions, letting enemies potentially one-shot you, but also allowing players to open up some truly game-breaking God runs. We'll be looking in depth at God runs later, but first we have to touch on how you get to God runs to begin with, and that ties into the game's progression systems. Progression in Risk of Rain breaks down into two separate categories: in-run progression and meta progression. In-run progression is tied primarily to item and power-up acquisition and, to a lesser extent, leveling up your survivor. The leveling systems play second fiddle to one of the most important core mechanics of Risk of Rain, which is collecting items and building your loadout to power up your survivor, and how staggeringly crazy that scaling can become. Power creep in Risk of Rain isn't a consequence, it's a feature, and I've played many a run where I become an unstoppable being of incomprehensible power, right until I was stopped with extreme prejudice by a monster I didn't even realize was there until I'd been flatlined. And getting atomized aside, testing the limits of how high your power can rise never ends with me feeling that sense of outrage when a run does end prematurely. I mean, sure, there's the sudden realization that my run has been shattered and the knee-jerk scream of "No!" But honestly, even then, I can't stop smiling. Meta progression, on the other hand, comes in the form of meeting various challenges and conditions during a run to unlock items, characters, ability loadouts, and more. These challenges include relatively simple tasks like completing the first stage in under 5 minutes, reaching a particular chest on a particular stage in under 10 minutes, duplicating an item 7 times in a row, reaching a hidden realm off the beaten path, and many others. These are the main methods of meta progression, unlocking more and more characters to try out and find out who best suits your preferred playstyle, and then completing even more challenges to unlock their individual ability kits for even more build diversity and potential experimentation. Perhaps even more important to the overall game's meta progression are items. Items come in a few varieties. Your basic scaling rarity with items that range from common to touched by Jesus Christ himself. Then you've got your more specific classes of items, from active use equipment to boss items that can only be obtained by, you guessed it, killing bosses. Or lunar items, which offer unique powers in exchange for debuffs and various penalties, which you can obtain from the newts at the bazaar between time, or from lunar pods randomly appearing in regular stages, all of which cost lunar coins, a meta currency that persists between runs. Finally, there's void items, which you can find scattered throughout the environment in void cradles, which open in exchange for half the player's health. Void items give powerful effects while corrupting specific regular items that correspond to that specific void item. Items in Risk of Rain vary widely from near useless to entirely game-breaking, and can be as simple as boost to attack speed or power to complex systems that add entirely new attacks and modifiers to the way the game performs and behaves. Additionally, less essential progression comes in the form of information about different environments, bestiary entries on the monsters and enemies you encounter in the game, while beating the game with each survivor unlocks bios and text logs related to each. These optional, informative logs and entries comprise the most overlooked aspect of Risk of Rain, the lore. I completely overlooked the lore. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you, I know some of the lore. I know about Mithrix and Providence and the well where Mithrix drowned Providence's gummy worms or whatever. I'm not totally in the dark here, but I might as well be. Most of the lore I gleaned from watching people on the internet way more qualified than me talk about it. Now, with that being said, I think the lore for Risk of Rain is really well designed for several reasons. For one, the writing itself is solid. The Risk of Rain lore is drip-fed to players through these data logs, and as all the best game lore tends to be, it's all rather indirect. There's no data log that says, read here for the tragic story of Mithrix and Providence and their Shakespearean sibling betrayal, and also, by the way, they're basically space gods, but also there may be other space gods, but also we aren't even going to really talk about that. No, the lore is a lot more subtle than that, and it's hidden in little kernels and breadcrumb trails across many data points, often in seemingly unimportant logs about random items, monsters, or locations that shouldn't possibly have any deeper meaning. As a longtime FromSoft fanboy, I love this type of storytelling. The way the world and history of everything around you is there if you're willing to put the legwork into discovering it all. And the payoff is a very well-told story that fleshes out the world in a meaningful, engaging way. And I really didn't engage with any of it. But I love that about the lore too. As far as the lore is concerned, Risk of Rain delivers the experience you want from it. You can forego ever reading a single word of lore, and your experience will be something like a space bandito crash landing on a planet, committing a bit of handy-dandy space genocide, and killing a funny man with a hammer. Or it can be a deep dive into the history of a foreign world and the drama of godly brothers torn apart by their conflicting natures. For players who love the feeling of diving into lore, it's all there. And I get the appeal of that. Normally I'm right in there with you guys, trying to piece it all together. But Risk of Rain also does a fantastic job of brushing all that world and lore building aside and saying, hey, if you want to be a space Komodo dragon doing a Hulk jump and don't care about anything else beyond decimating the local ecosystem, go for it. We're not going to make you slow down for any of this lore stuff. And contrary to my usual nature of investigatively pouring through optional content, with Risk of Rain, I just wanted to jump in and go crazy. So I did just that. Risk of Rain could have contented itself with the survivors being a simple reskin of a character that basically functions as the same as all the others except for a few minor tweaks here or there. And given how much variance we get from items with their wild effects, most people would have probably been okay with that. Instead, each survivor has its own distinct moveset and play styles that drastically alter your approach to how the game is played. And these differences, both functional and aesthetic, set each survivor apart, giving them their own distinct and recognizable personality along with their own specialized role in the game. Like, Commando is one of two starting characters who serves as a jack of all trades that the vast majority of the Risk of Rain community hates. I personally think you're all racist against fish bowls. I don't mind Commando. His kit is simplistic, sure, but it's still fairly reliable. With the right loadout to bump his already high rate of fire even higher, and some damage focus items to put a little extra sting on his admittedly weak shots, Commando can be a reasonably competent survivor, if a bit, well, bland. Old Domehead doesn't have any particular gimmicks or tricks or unique abilities, he's just a straightforward pew-pew man. But he does have this. And really, what more do you need? The second starting character is Huntress, or gender-swapped space legless ninja, and as the only other starting character, she immediately steals all Commando's thunder. Huntress is a speed and mobility-oriented survivor, using her utility to teleport around enemies and keep out of the line of fire, which is essential for her success considering almost any reasonably strong enemy attack will fold Huntress like your mom on a Tuesday night. Her lock-on attacks help to keep constant damage output even if you don't have perfect aim, which is a nice touch considering you'll be repositioning so much it can get a bit tricky to pinpoint shots. I enjoy Huntress when I want to play a survivor more centered on movement and mobility rather than refined aim or placement of skills. And when you're looking to really tap into the flow of Traversal, Huntress is one of the best. Think of Multi as Wally's hostile older brother. This R2-D2 on steroids is a great pick for players who want some versatility and options in their survivor, as Multi's kit is geared towards switching between distinct attack modes for both short and long-range engagements. As a rolling sentient hunk of metal, his starting HP and armor are high, making him durable and tough, but players may need some patience to overcome his initially slow movement speed by hopping him up on drugs and caffeine. Although I often struggled playing Multi for the first stage or two, once this little mecha maniac really gets rolling, he's a powerful and adaptive survivor you can turn into an absolute murder bot, making him an easy pick. Captain is a survivor with a lot of unique applications and approaches to gameplay, with a kit oriented toward airstrikes and zone deployments for buffs and debuffs alike. I think he particularly shines in multiplayer where his positive AoE like the healing, resupply, and hacking beacons can benefit both Captain himself and any other survivors. Personally, I found Captain to be a miss, and he was possibly the survivor I spent the least amount of playtime with. I have no doubt that someone who really jives with his playstyle would not only turn Captain into a great solo survivor, but also a huge asset to multiplayer sessions. But for me, the best captains never leave their ship, so that's mostly where he stayed. A survivor that I absolutely loved and played a ton of, however, is Bandit, who specializes in mobility and hit-and-run tactics. His kit centers around comboing various skills together consistently to reach his full damage potential. Bandit requires a lot of skill to master and make use of at the highest level. As I already said, I'm a scrub, so I absolutely did not use Bandit to his full effect. Nonetheless, even for a trash can like me, Bandit can still be a lot of fun to play with, and his kit can be utilized to functional success. All of Bandit's attacks and abilities can be used at the right time to keep his abilities flowing into combos of shotgun blasts, hemorrhage-inducing dagger strikes, smoke bomb repositions to get to the back for bonus backstab damage, and high damage 6-shooter shots to finish enemies and keep his abilities charged and the combos relentlessly flowing. A highly skilled player who knows Bandit well turns him into one of the most impressively skillful survivors in the game. But even for a scrub like me, his kit is active, engaging, and gives a lot of room for survivability and fun plays. Not since Bebop has being a space cowboy been so much fun. Artificer is an offense-based survivor who basically functions as the space version of a mage, wielding powerful attacks focused on AoE and burst damage, some useful utility abilities with no real defensive or evasive options, and piss-poor HP. So yeah, your classic glass cannon mage build, except, you know, in space. Artificer wasn't my favorite survivor, as her kit, while offensively versatile, felt slow and clunky to me. And where a survivor like Multi had enough health and armor to allow me to survive until I built up enough movement items to make up for his initial sluggishness, I struggled to keep Artificer alive long enough to get her moving fast enough for long-term survival. Still, if you take advantage of Artificer's hover passive and get her up above most enemies, positioning her to rain down her powerful spells from above with relative impunity, that's really where the Space Mage shines. There's a certain evil glee in this approach that lets you take full advantage of her powerful offensive kit with relatively low risk. So, if you've the patience to overcome her squishy nature and lack of advanced movement, along with a tactical mind to get her in the right favorable position, Artificer may be just exactly the survivor you're looking for. Now we get to the goodest boy in Risk of Rain, everyone's favorite venomous purple puppers, Acrid. Acrid is a melee ranged hybrid character who uses potent poison and blight skills to inflict heavy damage over time to large groups of enemies for enormous potential damage output. Acrid benefits much more from tagging enemies and doling out that damage over time both singularly and against groups, and uses his massive leaps to both land on groups of enemies and inflict splash damage, or to make space and get away from a crowd he has poisoned, letting them slowly die off at a distance. With a solid mix of melee and ranged skills that are equally viable, abilities that can accrue heavy damage to numerous enemies at the same time, and one of the most enjoyable traversal utilities in the entire game, it's no wonder Acrid has been adopted as something of a mascot by the Risk of Rain community. Well, that and he's a adorable, murderous purple dinosaur. I mean, the man has a plushie for a reason, people. How can you not love that big purple face? Our next survivor dares to ask the question, what if Venom, but plant and robot instead of Black Goo and Tom Hardy? The answer, my roguelike loving chums, is Rex. Rex is a ranged survivor that uses a mix of direct and AoE attacks that trade a solid damage output and healing effects on many of his abilities for a cut of his HP on use. The robot plant hybrid has a passive that inflicts a weakened status with some abilities, slowing enemies, weakening their armor, and lowering their damage output. Rex functions as a high-risk, high-reward survivor, with many of his attacks costing HP and making him wager chunks of health in exchange for potentially being healed back to full while inflicting great damage. In the hands of a player who is conscious about when to properly use his kit to maximum benefit versus minimum cost, and who is able to put together a good stack of survivability items to see him through the HP drain, Rex can be an absolute monster on the battlefield. I'm not one of those players, but they're out there, I promise. Next up, we have the Mushroom Man himself, Engineer. The real star of this bungus-loving fellow's kit is his special, 2 deployable turrets that inherit all effects and synergies from Engineer's items and scaling. This effectively means that both turrets and Engineer all have massive potential for high damage output, as well as multiple other beneficial effects. Once you get rolling with the right set of items, Engineer becomes an absolute powerhouse, deploying his turrets to do the heavy lifting of combat and adding in his mines and grenades to the mix. While I personally enjoy a more direct kit, Engineer is a ton of fun for just how different his playstyle is and how much it makes you shift your thinking and how to address looting, combat, and navigation. Then we have every katana enthusiast main, the space weeaboo himself, Mercenary. Mercenary is a melee survivor with a focus on constant movement and non-stop attacks to close the gap on his opponents. While I don't consider myself enough of a man of culture to be a full-on weeb, I've played enough samurai games to have a bit of a taste for the blade. Despite this, I couldn't stand playing Mercenary. Maybe I just couldn't get a run going with a loadout that really synergized with him. Maybe I just suffer from a profound skill issue that keeps me from truly walking the path of the blade. In any case, Mercenary just didn't click for me, not even a little bit, and playing as Swords and Spaceman was more an exercise in frustration than any real enjoyment. And there are very few of the survivors I felt genuinely frustrated by, so that's saying something. My distaste for Mercenary even made me wonder if maybe I just did not like melee characters in Risk of Rain. Maybe I was strictly a ranged survivor all along. But then I played and immediately fell in love with the personification of pugilism, Loader. Loader is an ultra-powerful melee survivor with a slow movement speed offset by a highly versatile and mobile ability kit. Loader packs extraordinary power in her attacks that more than make up for her melee range limitations. While Loader is a capable survivor all around with both strong offensive options and solid passive defenses, her gauntlet and grapple hook really is where she shines most brightly. Comboing these two abilities are seriously some of the most fun you can have in the game. Using her gauntlet to launch yourself at enemies and mowing down everyone in your wake, launching into the air or far past a crowd of mobs, then spinning around, grappling back toward the horde of attackers and mopping up any of the remnants with Loader's swinging fists. And not only is it a blast to get around with her gauntlet and grappling abilities, but her charge gauntlet has one of the highest singular damage potentials in the game, absolutely slapping the piss out of anything and everything it comes into contact with in a way that I don't think could possibly get old. It's just a joy to Falcon Punch everything into atoms time and time again. Loader is one of my favorite survivors to play with her mobile and high damage output kit, and she's one of the easiest to put a god run together with. More on those soon. Railgunner, my beloved. Railgunner is one of 2 new survivors included in the Survivors of the Void DLC. She's a long-range specialist sniper with a kit centered around massive single-shot damage and calculated aiming, with some basic crowd control tools sprinkled in to give her the breathing room to execute her one-shot, one-kill playstyle. Railgunner comes with an intriguing passive that retools her critical strikes, trading a random chance for scoring a crit for a guaranteed crit if she hits an enemy's weak point. All items scaling critical chance instead add bonus crit damage to the crit Railgunner scores. So as long as you can hit your shots, Railgunner is big crit, big damage all the time. Railgunner is one of my favorite survivors, possibly my favorite period. She's a bit more specialized than many of the other survivors with a more narrow focus kit, and that focus is raw single-shot power. Picking enemies off at a distance, one-shotting bosses, the outrageously high damage numbers, the mind-melting satisfaction of hitting a weak point and getting the... It's just... There's certainly survivors that are more mobile, have broader, more adaptable kits, or kits that are more uniquely imaginative. But no other survivor takes one style, one aspect of gameplay, and refines it to such polished perfection. Railgunner is an S-tier hero for an S-tier game. Look, I gotta be honest, I haven't unlocked Void Fiend or Heretic yet. I tried really hard to get both of them while also feeling like I explored all the other survivors and gave them enough time, not you, at least playing everybody thoroughly enough to get a good enough feel for them to talk about. Plus, you know, favoritism. But even with a solid chunk of hours in Risk of Rain, I still haven't gotten to either Heretic or Void Fiend yet. My bad. So, I'm not going to use a wiki to rattle off information about heroes I haven't even unlocked yet. They're out there, you can look up specifications of exactly how to unlock them if you haven't done so and need that, and I'm just going to assume until I get my hands on them that Void Fiend and Heretic are the best survivors and blow all the others out of the water, and I'm really missing out without having played them, so I should play even more Risk of Rain until I unlock them and can call them mine. So yeah. Those are the survivors, and I'm just now realizing how long I've been talking about these characters alone. Holy sh! Many of Risk of Rain's survivors are unlocked through the game's wealth of secrets that I totally didn't use the internet to discover, I promise. There's the standard unlockable progression secrets to open up new survivors and items, but also a great many deeper ones. I'm going to spoil some, but not all of them here, so, you know, spoilers and all. But you've already made it this far. I literally spurged about almost every survivor in the game. You're already in too deep. Why do you even care about spoilers? The Newt shop at the Bazaar Between Time, Bazaar, is one of the easiest to discover secrets, and reaching it is as simple as finding a Newt shrine on a normal stage, using a lunar coin to unlock it, and summoning the blue portal to appear after the stage's teleporter is activated. That doesn't sound simple at all, but it's fine. The Newt shop houses lunar items to be purchased with lunar coins, high-tier items available in exchange for low-tier items, and the option to select which stage you proceed to next in exchange for more lunar coins. Oh, and also, you can buy Artificer. Like, they'll just sell you a whole space wizard lady. Clearly, the Newts did not get the memo on the Emancipation Proclamation. The Bazaar Between Time is also a gateway to the Void Fields, one of the game's many hidden realms. Hidden realms are unique secret stages reached through specific and sometimes complicated means. These include A Moment Fractured, A Moment Whole, the Bazaar Between Time, the Void Fields, the Gilded Coast, and the new DLC realms, the Void Locust and the Planetarium. All of these hidden realms house something special and unique in them that sets them apart from standard environments and make them worth discovering and paying a visit at least once. Then there's the Bulwark Ambry, which I've been calling the Bulwark Armory up until looking it up for this video. The Ambry is a special hidden realm unlockable on the lower level of Sky Meadow by inputting specific code combinations into the compound generator to open a portal to the Ambry. Inside, you face various challenges against groups of high-level mobs and mini-bosses, each challenge differing dependent upon the corresponding code you use to enter. Your prize for beating each challenge is a powerful artifact, which are some of the most unique and important unlockables in the game. The artifacts are selectable at the start of each run and have many effects that change the way Risk of Rain behaves on fundamental levels. These effects range from enabling friendly fire for both survivors and monsters alike, making any player's death and the entire run during multiplayer sessions, all mobs spawning as elites only, starting with almost no health but a massive bump to your damage, getting invaded by an aggressive doppelganger that will hunt you, and more. Artifacts are primarily used to introduce new randomized elements to runs to increase challenge or give the player unexpected and weird experiences that can't be replicated in the normal game. Of all the artifacts, however, none is more revered, more coveted, or more essential to the Risk of Rain experience than the Control artifact. A massive part of a roguelike's essence and appeal is the randomization and the unpredictability of RNG. RNG is a core principle of roguelikes, and the uncertainty of how a run will turn out is a huge part of what draws people to the genre. And since the Control artifact allows you to do away with item randomization and instead select which item you receive from literally any chest or item source, it should absolutely ruin Risk of Rain, which is above all else a roguelike. Instead, the Control artifact swaps out RNG in exchange for something even more entertaining: the chance to break the game. I firmly believe an essential part of Risk of Rain's experience is breaking the game. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as to call it a core mechanic. While Risk of Rain is a fantastic game when played normally, it's not until you start to put together the type of runs that utterly break the game that Risk of Rain's full potential is revealed. But how do you break the game in the first place? There's more than one answer to that, and you could conceivably do it through a totally normal run if RNG works out perfectly in your favor. But it's much more reliable to just take matters into your own hands. Start with the Commander artifact. This of course allows you to choose your own items from chests instead of just taking whatever RNG gives you, which allow you to craft builds that target specific stats, attributes, effects, and synergies from your items to direct the way your survivor and the game behave. And because the game stacks the effects of multiple items of the same type essentially infinitely, you can continue to acquire the same item 25, 50, 100 times and beyond until that item's effect is so massively amplified, the game can barely keep up. And because you can loop your runs over and over again, also essentially infinitely, your chance to acquire more items and build the amplifying effect of those items keeps scaling as well. These essentially infinite parameters let players keep raising the ceiling of the game without limit, continuing as long as they are able to survive and outlast the endlessly scaling forces of your enemies. It's well known in the game's community that you know you're playing Risk of Rain the right way when everything around you keeps dying and you have no idea how or why. That's the kind of craziness that Risk of Rain God runs scale into. It's constant pandemonium that I can't help but laugh at because it's a carefully engineered situation that has become bigger and bigger until the entire game is gloriously snowballing out of control. And that's honestly my favorite part of roguelikes, the way you can end up with a run that has all the right special ingredients to be just the most broken and impossibly OP run imaginable, and you just have to laugh at the absurdity of how you crush the life out of everything that crosses your path. And because you can control everything about your build, you can come up with distinct experiences depending on which survivor you're playing and what aspects of items and power-ups you're targeting. Ever wanted to see what would happen when a man in a fishbowl is pushed to the absolute limits of substance abuse? I give you the Commando Overstim build. A build less about surviving monsters and clearing stages, and more about the logistical challenges of moving without immediately pinballing across the entire fucking map. What about what it would be like if Wally was War Machine? All you need is an infinite amount of missiles that will fill the entire screen and destroy every living thing for miles, and your frame rate. Loader is already a hella fun survivor, but she becomes even more fantastic when you turn her into One Punch Ma'am, with a build that can kill God himself with one punch. Simply pile on shaped glass and crowbars, then watch as the world's most dedicated fister destroys all challengers with just one punch. Saitama would be so proud. The entire appeal to a sniper is the one shot, one kill. With the God Snipe build, there's no exception to that rule, not even Thor at home himself. Like with Loader, the secret sauce is shaped glass and crowbars. The moment Mithrix entered Railgunner's sights, he was a dead man. And of course, we can't possibly forget the Bungus Man himself. Take Engineer, deploy his turrets, and load up on as many bustling fungus as you can possibly find. That's it. That's the build. Give this man his mushrooms and let him be at peace, while all his gadgets and minions go to war. Risk of Rain has a lot of elements in play, making it a phenomenal game, some obvious, some subtle. But the fact that they all so clearly work together to set up over-the-top runs where you can steer the game towards such a broken state is brilliant game design on the part of Hapu Games. The fact that you can so readily craft a God run is an absolutely huge component of why Risk of Rain is an S-tier game. Gentlemen and ladies, all two of you, I give you the man that never misses, the absolute mad lad who only ever produces certified hood classics, Chris Christodoulou. If you can't tell, I love Risk of Rain's soundtrack. I love video game music in general. I made an entire video about it over here talking about my favorite soundtracks, and Risk of Rain was definitely the star of that particular video. And while there are so many gaming OSTs that I love, I would be hard pressed to name a soundtrack better than Risk of Rain's. Simply because not a single track that Chris Christodoulou has made is anything less than fantastic, energizing, engaging, moving musical brilliance. I don't tend to think of most things in terms of this is my favorite. If you ask me for my favorite food, I'm hard pressed to answer. Same with my favorite movie, my favorite color, favorite superhero, hell, even when asking my favorite game, you aren't likely to get a solid answer. I just don't tend to think of things in that way. I like things, or I like things a lot, and that's about as far as I tend to rank stuff. But I honestly think that I could comfortably say that Risk of Rain is my favorite gaming soundtrack. Even now, a solid 70 hours in, there's not a single track that I am not immediately vibing to every time I hear it. And it's probably seen the most out-of-game playtime of any soundtrack I've listened to last year. Hell, the whole reason I gave Risk of Rain a try is because Seven Red Suns, a fellow YouTuber you should totally check out sometime, sent me one of the songs as a suggestion for background music for a video, and I love the soundtrack enough to finally give Risk of Rain a try. Thanks for that, Sons. You single-handedly created an addiction. There's a lot of specific elements that go into Risk of Rain that form its identity as a unique game and an overall experience. The unique and memorable survivors, the simple art direction and instantly recognizable color palette, the subtle storytelling, the one-of-a-kind power scaling, and the ability to completely break the game through the control artifact and build crafting a god run. But none of those exceptional elements are what I think of first when I think of Risk of Rain. All of that comes after the rain formerly known as purple begins its synth pulse in my head, where it usually remains pulsing for the rest of the day. There's a few odds and ends of Risk of Rain that deserve to be mentioned, like the fact the game is multiplayer, meaning you can share all of the highs and lows of this amazing game, like the joy of the absolutely broken power you can have during the 49th round of a simulacrum run, and the devastation of being smashed into oblivion during the 50th and final round. Speaking of the simulacrum, it's one of 3 alternate modes in Risk of Rain that add a little spice, a little kick to the game. First are the prismatic trials, which set players competing on the same seeded run for the fastest time. This run refreshes every 24 hours and features 2 stages on rainstorm difficulty with artifact multipliers in play to increase randomization and challenge. Players have to destroy 3 crystals scattered throughout the stage before charging the teleporter and continuing on. I do not fuck with the prismatic trials. Next up is Eclipse mode, which, as I mentioned back in the difficulty discussion earlier in the video, is essentially monsoon difficulty on steroids, adding in stacking challenge modifiers on every successful run to make the game even more punishingly difficult than monsoon already is. As I have said, I am a feeble little baby boomer gamer who doesn't even dabble on monsoon, so obviously I do not fuck with Eclipse mode. Finally, there's the Simulacrum, an alternate mode where you can challenge 50 rounds of incoming waves of monsters within an arena ringed by the Abyss, which will damage you over time anytime you step outside of bounds of the protective ring, up to and including killing you if you hang out outside of bounds for too long. I do fuck with Simulacrum. As a matter of fact, there are times when I prefer Simulacrum over the main game mode. The waves of mobs within a confined space is intense and immediate, and there's less downtime to traverse stage and loot since almost all of the loot is right there within easy reach as well as spawning between rounds. You can also do plenty of build crafting with the command artifact if you'd like to set up a god run within the simulacrum itself. And there's even some element of risk reward with a smattering of chests often appearing just outside the bounds of the arena, tempting you out into the abyss to try and survive the damage just long enough to score some extra powerful items. For me, Simulacrum is easily the best alternate mode, and a welcome change of pace from the loop of the main game. What? Have I beaten the Simulacrum? Let's talk about DLC and ongoing support. Risk of Rain 2 has DLC in the form of Survivors of the Void, and it is a fantastic addition to the game, adding in 2 new playable survivors, 3 new fleshed out environments, 2 hidden realms, a healthy helping of new enemies, a surprising amount of powerful new items, 2 new stage bosses, an all new end boss that I haven't beaten yet, and most importantly, most essentially, new Chris Christodoulou tracks. As far as DLCs go, Survivors of the Void is way up there in value given how much it adds to the game. For $15, there's not much else you could buy for the same price that is going to give you more bang for your buck. I don't know, maybe Hollow Knight? Assuming you haven't already bought Hollow Knight, fine. That would be more value than Survivors of the Void. Buy Hollow Knight, then buy Survivors of the Void. There, between those two, that's your next 6 months or so of S-tier gaming for $30. You're welcome. Not only is Survivors of the Void an amazing DLC, but there's more DLC to look forward to. A whole new expansion to the game called Seekers of the Storm currently in development. And I couldn't be happier or more excited for more Risk of Rain goodness in the future. But there's a shadow of uncertainty hanging over Seekers of the Storm and the entire Risk of Rain franchise. And what a dark, bloated shadow it is, given it's cast by none other than 2K Games. If you're not aware, the long and short of it is, both the original Risk of Rain and the game we've been talking about this whole video, Risk of Rain 2, are the much-loved franchise created and developed by Hapu Games, a tiny indie game dev studio comprised of, as far as I've seen, I shit you not, 3 people. Let me say that again, just for, you know, a bit of emphasis. 3 fucking people made this masterpiece of a game. What the actual Until November of 2022, when Gearbox Entertainment acquired the full rights to Risk of Rain. And of course, Gearbox Entertainment's parent company is, you guessed it, 2K Games. This is concerning. For several reasons, but most notably because of egregious loot box and monetization tactics, to the point 2K were subject of a class action lawsuit. For an absolute gem of gaming, a beloved indie darling title like Risk of Rain 2, to go from the personally invested hands of a 3-man team carefully crafting every detail of this one-of-a-kind franchise, and into a studio beholden to the directives and priorities of a money-hungry megacorp developer who has clearly shown their primary focus is squeezing every last hard-earned cent from their customers with minimal quality product to show for it is concerning. And the fact that the newest Risk of Rain related thing we get after Hapu's departure that is purely handled by Gearbox is this weird mobile Risk of Rain game nobody asked for, and it's a free-to-play gacha game, is fucking concerning. I've seen some discourse from fans throwing shade at Hapu Games for selling Risk of Rain to a scummy AAA studio that's probably just going to ruin the franchise. And I get it. I love Risk of Rain too, so I'm as disappointed by the possibility of the damage Gearbox may do to this franchise as all of you. But at the same time, I can't fault Hapu Games for taking the bag. We can all say we'd never sell out like that until we're blue in the face, but it's easy to say that shit when nobody has ever offered us literally life-changing money. And the fact that Hapu Games only has to split that between 3 people? Life-changing money, guys. The type that will secure their family's future and allow them to pursue future games and titles they want to create with the same passion and creative control they use to make Risk of Rain such an amazing franchise. And no matter how dubious I regard Gearbox, how could I be anything but happy for the success, security, and raw potential that deal offered Hapu Games? I haven't put in near the hours that some Risk of Rain fans have, but for the hours that I've gotten so far, and the doubtless many hours I'll put in the future, I'm grateful to Hapu for every last fantastic one. On that note, we've seen the trailer for Seekers of the Storm and some of the conversation around it from the dev team at Gearbox Games, and so far, it doesn't look bad. It even looks, dare I say it, kinda good. Does this guarantee all as well? Not by a long shot. I personally am going to have to see the finished product of Seekers of the Storm and maybe several more DLCs and future Risk of Rain related products free of microtransactions or other predatory monetization, with the focus remaining purely on the heart and soul of the game. But for now, all we can do is look at the signs and judge by the direction it indicates things may be going in. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic for Risk of Rain's future. Like, very cautiously. Like, so cautiously optimistic, my optimism is hanging on by a cunt hair. It's this close to gone. Risk of Rain is one of the purest examples of an indie darling that transcends its lowly origins to ascend to gaming greatness. And while there are plenty of indie games, roguelikes, and hero-based games that share common strands of DNA with Risk of Rain, little parts and pieces of the game's overarching greatness, when you put the pieces together to form the complete puzzle that is Risk of Rain, there's nothing else in gaming quite like it. It is special. All the die-hard fans know it, and I'm willing to bet if you've never played Risk of Rain, if you give the game a chance, it won't be long before you know it too. Risk of Rain is beyond question an S-tier game that brings many of its players back for game after game, even after they've cleared and unlocked most of its features. After all, even once you understand the game in full, with endless scaling comes endless challenge, endless experimentation, and for many dedicated players, endless fun. And that's the video. If you haven't played Risk of Rain before, even though I went in depth into this game, there are no words nor videos that can adequately match the fun and enjoyment of just playing the game. So this game is 1000% worth it for new players, even after having watched all of this. More than newcomers discovering the game though, I made this video for the fans. People who love Risk of Rain as much or even more than I do. I'm a casual compared to so many of this franchise's hardcore fan base, and not just because I'm a Drizzle player, but because many of you have invested so much more time and passion into this one-of-a-kind game. I know that I'm just a visitor here, and I just hope that I did this phenomenal game and community enough justice for you guys to appreciate this. A huge thank you to anyone who has ever supported my videos, from my subscribers to my Patreon and YouTube members, and yes, even you people in the back that watch all my videos but never hit the subscribe button, you weirdos. Lastly, listen. If Gearbox fucks this up, it's okay. We can hate on them for ruining something beautiful, and if they do, we absolutely should. But they can never take Risk of Rain from us. We'll always have what it's been, and we'll always have what we all collectively experience together in this special little gem of a game. They can't take that from us.